I'll just do this right in front of me. This should be good. Yeah, that looks a little better. Not perfect, but
hey man, that's what people come to expect, man. You're the gritty basement bodybuilder.
that is me. Yeah, I'm pretty low budget. Just out of like curiosity, the other day, I just looked up my name on Reddit. I just typed in basement bodybuilding, and then someone was like, they posted a list of like their top 8 favorite YouTubers or people they recommend, and like with a little description, there was like, I think mine said super low budget, but his methods work pretty damn well. I'm like,
Well,
can't get much more accurate than that.
yeah, when I was talking to Jeffrey, I was talking about the fact that I actually like the charm of low budget videos.
It's just real.
Yeah, something happens when you take it from the when you take it to that super polished very production focused content. Sometimes it takes some of the magic out of it. Like you relate to the content creator a little bit more because you're not like watching a movie. Like it makes them more relatable, I guess you could say.
Yeah, when you have a high quality video, I feel like there's a wall that goes up. There's a barrier that just separates you, where it's like this person's like some magical perfect being, when in reality, obviously it's not the case. But then with like I make my videos kind of low budget on purpose. Well, one, obviously to save me time, but two, just because it's like the people that I like to watch are the people that you can actually kind of connect to. And it's like if I'm trying to like edit everything, I'm not going to be able to like sneak in a dry humor joke and just be my raw self in the cold basement and my monotone voice,
100%. That's why I like podcasting, because I feel like podcasting in general, obviously there's more polished podcasts out there, obviously, but I like that just like raw content.
Well, it's not rushed either. It's just
No.
a free flowing, just chill conversation. And you have what, at least an hour for every podcast. So it's like you're not in any rush to say anything. It's a real conversation. You can't fake it because it's not getting edited. So that's what I like about it. Your podcast with Jeffrey was great. I thought that raw talk at the beginning was dope.
Yeah, a lot of people gave me feedback on that, and that's like something that I kind of want to do on the podcast a bit more, because like a lot of content creators, they're very focused on talking about hypertrophy and all the things they're focused on, but sometimes it's kind of cool to get into like the more backstory type of stuff as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good balance, because the way that I see it is I have my channel where I can do my creative expression, which is ultimately what my channel's for, with my ideas of training and that. And it's like, am I just going to come on a podcast and like give a summarized version of my training philosophy, or should we probably use this as the time to like ask random questions and go over like whether it's related to training or not? I think at some point it is cool to go a little bit deeper than just like how much frequency should you do when you're training, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's no different than back in the day when you had like one of your favorite bands and they're talking about maybe like their personal life, like like that's what people like, even when they like watch celebrities and stuff, they kind of want to hear about the backstory and stuff like that. Not that any of us are necessarily celebrities, but
no, but not celebrities. But I think there's regardless of the size of the channel, what you say can have a pretty profound impact on people's lives. And if you catch the right person at the right time, it's like, I mean, I know I was that way. Like I found a few like YouTubers or friends or whatever that it's like you see them in the right place, right time, and they say the right thing, and that's stuff like that's always going to be life changing. So to see more of who that is as a role model, I think it's kind of key.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we'll go into that a little bit, because I'm always curious about how people not just got into lifting, but got into maybe like the natural community / got into like putting out content. Like how did you like what's the basement bodybuilding origin? Let's start at the very beginning. Like maybe that can even start from when you first started training to you wanting to actually share your philosophy.
Yeah, I'd be down. It's a good topic.
Let's get into it, man. So how did you get into lifting?
So getting into lifting, that's something that I'd always kind of wanted. And when I was younger, I couldn't necessarily afford a gym membership, as crazy as that sounds. It's just something that I always wanted and almost kind of put it off. But then once I started to work a little bit more when I was in high school and whatnot, I ended up buying just a paid in full year membership at my local gym, and the gains kind of just started there. I always thought being jacked was cool. I don't have some fancy story of dealing with any adversity or anything. Just ever since I was a little kid, I was like, being jacked is cool. I just want to be big, and I like it. So ultimately, that's the biggest thing for me. Nothing too special, but just being able to fulfill that and kind of express that through training it's just part of who I am. And obviously, you can tell through the content that I make in my videos and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. What, like when you were first learning about training, who were the people that you first learned from? Because I feel like this fitness industry is such a rat's nest. Like everyone likes to shit talk Athlete X and stuff, but I'll be straight
Right.
up. For the first 2 years of training, he was the biggest guy on YouTube. So it was like I'm always watching his videos, or just you don't know better at the beginning. You're very ignorant to what good information is. So what did that process look like for you, kind of wading through all the BS?
Yeah, my the couple people that I remember most profoundly were Callum von Moger was just starting to come up, so it was a little bit of him. Um, Bradley Martin was making some content. Obviously, followed a lot of his stuff, and this is back when these guys were not that big, maybe 100,000, 200,000 subscribers. Athlete X, and it's funny because like when I first started following him, I was just some not very smart, like 17-year-old kid. And I was kind of like, why is the strength coach talking about biceps so much? Like, I feel like I could already see past certain stuff, but he does have a good understanding of some of the basics of that kind of stuff. So that obviously helped me a little bit. I do. It was a mix of those guys. So some of the vloggy types, it was also when Jeff Nipper just started creating his more mainstream type of stuff. So that was what kind of kept me in check. But other than that, those guys, a couple other like random vlogger influencers is what I started to get into the more I lifted. And ultimately that took me to a bad place that I had to break out of. But yeah,
And what
that's pretty much my influence.
and what was that bad place?
Yeah, the bad place is living through someone else, just to put it bluntly. And you don't realize it's happening until you break out of that cycle. And for me, that was giving up lifting, which is kind of sad that it got to that point. But it's like you watch all these vlogs, you get to the point where you're so into the fitness in the gym, but you can only do it for what, an hour or two a day. And then after that, it's like, all right, well, you got your meals, and that's somewhat related to bodybuilding. But other than that, you're just kind of doing your random day-to-day stuff and just thinking about the gym. And when you're someone that has that mindset that I had and still kind of have, but I'm a little older now and I got adult life to live, but you want to continue with the fitness. You get tied into these vlogs, and then before you know it, you lose your own creative expression, and you're living through someone else. So you care
Mm.
less about your own progress, and you're just living through their progress, and you don't even know, but it's just messing up your mind.
Dude, I feel like that's social media in general. You're taking in so much content that you become just like this. Yeah, you just become the content you consume, especially with like training content, or even like what's a little bit more dangerous is when it's like life advice, and you're just getting all this like fractured information. There's so many different voices just screaming at you, to the point where you don't even like have your own voice anymore. You're just like a uh, you just become what you consume pretty much.
Yeah, well, the problem with it is you follow people that are they're the ideal person that you want to become, and even if they're not that ideal person and they're not perfect, basically what I'm trying to say is they're usually towards the end of their self-fulfilling journey, so they're closer to who they want to be, and you see that confidence and you see how far they've come, and they have influence on you. And what ends up happening is, instead of you continuing to strive towards that person you want to be, you start to choose that person as your end goal. And ultimately, you either
Mhm.
just stagnate and you just kind of watch their videos, live through them, and do nothing about it, or you keep working on it, but you work to become that person. So you're either just you stagnate or you become a watered down version of that person. And
Mm.
never mind. Never mind. I I don't there's something I don't know if I should say it, like, if it's
Fucking let it out, bud.
fuck it, whatever. So, it's not calling out a person in particular, but it's calling out like a community. So, remember when, it must have been around 2019, 2020 when it was like David Lade was kind of the biggest social media, like, younger aesthetics type guy, and then you'd go in, like, the comment section, and it's just a bunch of mini David Lades wearing the same exact clothes, posing the same exact way in the same lighting. I'm
Mhm,
like, that's when it clicked in my head. I'm like, these guys are just copycats. And then I was like, shit, I can't go down that road. I have to start doing my own thing. And I kind of was to an extent, but it's like when you're that young, you just don't have that identity, and you're kind of lost. You're kind of wandering around, and it sucks because uh, I knew deep down that I had this kind of unique mindset and perspective on things, and I'm never going to be the smartest guy. I never have been and never will be, but I did have a unique perspective, and I'm fortunate that I ended up in a place where I could create what basement bodybuilding is becoming. And I feel like now I can finally think freely and think more critically. But yeah, when you're cast under the shadow of someone else and you're blindly following that person, yeah, the sheeple thing is real, man.
mhm, 100%. Um, I feel that way, like, I'll censor myself sometimes if I'm talking to someone or I'm watching a bunch of content, I'll kind of censor myself. Like, even if I'm sharing stuff online in a podcast, I'll almost think about what the other person's opinion is, and I don't necessarily wanna share something that might put me outside of that because I don't wanna cause, like, either conflict or it's just, like, this part of me that wants to just, like, kinda fit in. We all wanna, like, fit into a community, become, like you said, like, we all become, like, mini versions of those that we look up to. But that's, like, really dangerous because at the end of the day, you're just gonna become a watered down version of them and not actualize your own potential. And I definitely see that as a threat, even to my own, like, creativity, for sure. I totally relate to that. And even just aside from lifting, then you get into more like, um, you get into, like, the other side of the internet. As young men, like, do you know much about, like, the red pill community and stuff like that?
Yeah, I was kind of caught up in that. Like I was in a rough spot probably in around 2019, early 2020. I was nihilistic. I was part of that like red pill because
Yeah.
like let's be real. I mean, I had a bad mindset when it came to lifting. I wasn't lifting the right way. I was power building when I didn't really want that. I was just influenced by other people. Um
Mhm.
I wasn't my social life was trash. All these things, and it's weird because like I knew that I was within like striking distance of this solid identity and confidence that I'm on my
Mhm.
way towards now, but I was influenced out of it. And yeah, I was kind of red pilled. I've never been someone to like spend time on Reddit and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been pretty like red pilled at least in my version of what I think what I think it means. But I've never been like a big internet guy, if that makes sense.
Mhm. So when you say, when you were in that really rough spot, what kind of content were you consuming at the time? Like, like, as a young guy, let's just say your goal is to, like, build muscle. You go on the internet, you try to find some people that know what they're talking about. Let's say your goal is you want to find a girlfriend or you want to get more confidence. Like, we are part of a generation where we go to other men that are more like they're on the path already and we try to learn from them. So what was some of the stuff, like, aside from lifting, that you were into?
Yeah, I'd say just mainstream self improvement stuff, which is ultimately natural hypertrophy just had a video on it. And my first thought when I see that generic kind of mainstream self improvement stuff, it's just a circle jerk of people talking about
Mm,
things that won't help you. And it's very
I
clear that the
I
creator,
agree 100%.
yeah,
Even
the
though I was
creator,
into that.
the people that make those videos have no clue what they're talking about. They're usually someone that just like happens to be charismatic or happens to be good looking, and people kind of look up to that, but they have no idea how the hell they got there. So I think it was just generic watered down advice, and that turned me a little bit resentful and bitter and I guess red pilled towards certain things. And eventually I got to a point where I'm just like, fuck it, like I'm not going to try on anything except for lifting. I'm just going to get as jacked as I possibly can, as strong as I possibly can. And then a few months later, this is like early 2020, I the obviously COVID happened, and that kind of forced me out of the gym. Or I probably shouldn't have even said the C word. My bad. I don't know if this is
Oh
gonna get
no,
like
you're.
demonetized or
Oh,
banned or something.
I don't give a shit.
We're too far into the future for
Come
that.
after me.
COVID. And luckily I was forced out of power building, and I was forced out of certain content that I was watching. And I met the perfect girl just kind of by accident at that time, and my life kind of just shifted. And it was a good point where all I had was just that such limited equipment. So I had to relearn basic body weight stuff like dips, push-ups. I had a
Mm,
band for face pulls and some curls, pull-ups, that kind of stuff. A couple adjustable dumbbells, a homemade barbell. I made a homemade cable station, and that got me back into bodybuilding and hypertrophy training because I didn't have access, and I was kind of forced to give up on my powerlifting numbers. And then once I gave up on that attachment to powerlifting, because it kind of became my ego,
mm,
then I realized, and now I've met people that are in that same spot that I was, and I'm like, damn, that's I was attached. Like my ego was my powerlifting total. My ego was my bench, my squat, my deadlift, whatnot.
mm,
And to be able to break past that, and this isn't to shit on powerlifting because I know a lot of powerlifters that are always just badass and humble as fuck. And the people that are in powerlifting because they like it are awesome people. And I have a couple good buddies that are into that. So that's totally cool. But for myself, I was a fraud. I was just in it because I was good at it and I could say, oh, well, I can deadlift this much and you can't. So I feel good about myself. But in reality, that's like, if it's not something that I genuinely desire, it's not going to do anything for me. And that's one thing I've learned actually pretty recently.
mm. So when you say you didn't desire it, what kept you going through that? Just basically like an ego thing? You just kept doing it because you liked the fact that you were good at it?
Yeah, yeah, part of it was that, but I also think part of it was influence too. So the content I was consuming, it was everything in fitness and mainstream fitness. It's either like room temperature IQ bodybuilding of people that have no idea what they're talking, literally no idea what they're talking about, or it's like moderately smart power building type of stuff. So
Yeah.
I kind of fell more towards that. And when you're watching people just bench, squat, deadlift, accessories, bench, squat, deadlift, accessories, bench, squat, etc. It just goes on and on. That's you just end up doing that. So I turned into a watered down version of the people that I'd watch. And
Mhm.
that's why I don't post that stuff on the channel. Like I'll post a training log once a month to help people with technique on questions I get all the time, but I never talk about my personal life or like vlog. Nobody knows what my kitchen looks like or even the other side of my basement, you know? Like and I do that on purpose.
No, that's good, man. That's good. Um, like that whole idea of going through the motions with something that you don't really desire. I relate that to, like obviously you're extremely passionate about bodybuilding. You wouldn't put in this much effort into a YouTube channel if you weren't.
I hope.
Um be pretty ridiculous. Uh but what does that look like as far as like what you're like managing, or I guess finding the balance between like what brings you an income and like financial stability versus, the passion project? And like, do you see, are you doing this because you want to make this a career? Because I think like at the end of the day, like in order for you to continue to make room for what you're passionate about, you kind of have to, it needs to be financially viable at some point.
Yeah, so the the YouTube channel is surprisingly profitable. I don't take full advantage of it because I it goes kind of against my moral code, and I'm never going to do a sponsored video ever. I'm I think I might have ads on my videos, but the only reason I have that is because I can't figure out how to turn them off. The only thing I would do is sell coaching, which I do train a few people, but I keep it as affordable as I possibly can. I could charge twice as much. I know that for a fact. Um, but I like to keep it affordable to train people that maybe don't have
Mm,
all this extra money to go train. Like I just see it as like, well, this isn't my main job. Why do I need to charge so much? It's like I don't
mhm.
have to charge much. And yeah, do I make a little bit extra a month from YouTube? Sure, but that's not at all why I'm in it. And
Yeah.
everybody I train, like it's the most satisfying thing. Uh, being able to see what people are doing and see their mindset and give them feedback and help those people out. Like I love my clients. I love training them. And then to hear them talk about like, wow, your video today resonated with me so much. I've learned this, this, and this from you. And to see people like do their monthly measurements and then they're like, hey, measurements, progress pictures are all posted. I'm like, all right, I'll go take a look. And I'm like, holy shit, your arms are up half an inch in the past 4 months. Like, bro, good shit. Like that's awesome. And that's what I like to do. And like eventually, maybe I will do it full time, but I have to be so far past the point where it's just like profitable. It has to be the point where I could make, if I was to maximize it, 3 times as much as I need to, so I can just continue to charge a
Mhm.
general amount for coaching and just stick with coaching. And maybe I'll do a clothing brand one day just for fun. I'd
Yeah.
probably just sell flannels and green hats, but
I'd buy it right now, man.
dude, I was gonna say you'd rep it real
I'd rock
well.
I'd rock the shit out of that.
Hell
I
yeah,
had
yeah, you
I
got a good taste and style.
Yeah, I feel like we dress
I
kinda
see,
it's
I see
kinda
those
similar.
car vlogs.
Um, yeah, man, no, that's really cool. I think I'm even what mindset my mindset around it too is I wanna make sure, like, whatever I do, let's just say with my channel, I'm not really pushing this as hard as you are, even though uh recently I've really been thinking about it. I'm like, man, like I really like doing those podcasts and I want to give it a go and really try to like get a bunch of people on and like push it and try to like build a community with it. But there's always been this voice in the back of my head that's like, yeah, but you got to make money. And I don't necessarily want to make money. Um I feel like there's a danger of once something that you're passionate about becomes like has to be your main source of income, it then becomes this negative thing. Also, I really hate 99.9%, maybe not 99.9%, but a lot of online coaches are they're like vultures. Like DM me for coaching, blah blah. It's like they're not actually offering any value. Like there are coaches out there that offer great value. Faz is one of them. Like I highly recommend his
Hell yeah,
coaching. I'm sure you would offer a lot of value as well because you actually give a shit.
for
But I
sure.
feel but I feel like a lot of coaches on like IG and like TikTok and like you know what I'm talking about.
Oh
Just
yeah,
those very like
it's a nightmare.
self-serving coaches that aren't going to offer you any value. And it's to the point where I don't feel like getting in shape and like achieving the physique that you're striving towards needs to be super expensive. You know,
No, not at
whether
all.
like I think most of the information should be free. I think that like there's a brotherhood about it too. Like if it's like I think most of us can relate to a time where we've been down and out, feeling shitty, feeling small physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And then we wish someone else came to our aid and was like, "Hey, you can try this, do this." And that's why we look up to a lot of people on YouTube. And I think that you know, the monetary thing can kind of make that make take the magic out of it.
100%. I think you hit the nail on the head with that. And you take yeah, I mean, you take something like coaching or whatever and say, yeah, you use myself for an example. And I'm a trainer at heart. I got certified to be a trainer as as soon as I turned 18 and just started doing that instead of having like an actual job.
Mhm.
Uh, and that's just it's just what I like to do. And it keeps me fulfilled and satisfied. And I don't want to do it full time unless I'm in a, like I said, unless I'm more than comfortable and I've like made it in YouTube. Uh, then
So,
I
so oh,
you
sorry,
go.
just just to clarify, like you mean you don't want to do personal training full time or coaching full, like online coaching?
Oh yeah, I don't personal train in real life, but
Oh, okay, yeah,
I did for a while. I
yeah.
don't do it anymore, but
Mhm.
yeah, online coaching. I would enjoy doing it full time, but I don't want to pigeonhole myself into that. I don't want to corner myself into that because if
Mhm.
YouTube's going okay and I have like enough clients to sustain a good monthly income, then what happens if my channel starts to die? What happens if YouTube starts to die as a platform? And that's where you'd face a tough decision.
Mm.
Where it's like, now do I have to go get a full-time job, or now do I have to monetize the shit out of my channel and start doing sponsored videos and whatnot? Which
I like that mindset though, because it's like you're very, you know, like you're taking care of your shit. You're thinking about the possibility of it not working out. And a lot of people might look at that like, oh well, if you give yourself a plan B, you'll fail because you'll like have something to fall back on. But in reality, man, like as someone who's got burned in the past, like chasing a dream or something that's like a passion project, and then it not working out, it's like, man, fucking a fallback plan can be pretty nice. Like we all need to make money. Like the fucking you can't get by without money. It's just the way it is.
yeah, and I don't want to necessarily make all my money through YouTube.
Yeah.
And YouTube's, it's like I said a couple times, it's my creative expression. It's where I can get these ideas out. Like I've just had and it's funny because ever since I was a kid, I always knew I would end up on YouTube. It's the weirdest thing. I didn't before I even lifted. I was like, I know I'm gonna have a YouTube channel someday, and I just never knew what the hell it would be. And when I was yeah, when I was 17, I used to film like lifting vlogs when I first started lifting, and I'll probably release a couple of them if I ever hit like a big
Oh
milestone
yeah.
on the
Fuck yeah.
channel.
100K.
50K. Yeah,
50K.
it's funny because back then I was like I thought I knew everything there was to know about lifting, and I thought I sounded and came across this like confident lifter that knew what he was talking about. And then I look back and I'm like so soft spoken and quiet and like mumbling and I'm like, wow. So I had one idea to make a video and it's titled like lifting changes you or lifting changed me or something like
Oh
that.
yeah,
I'm sure
yeah, yeah.
part of it's just getting a few years older and more life experience, but I'm sure part of it has to do with lifting too and turning you into like more of a confident kind of outgoing person. I wouldn't call myself outgoing, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, you posted that video where it was like lessons that lifting taught you. It's like
Yeah,
lifting bleeds into other aspects of life.
I would say it does. Yes.
Yeah. Like what as far as like your personal life, like where would you say that lifting is kind of bled into?
That's a really good question. I would say for myself, it's just discipline in physical labor and chores and stuff that just need to get done. That's
Mm.
probably been the biggest thing for me because I've always been someone that is I can kind of dedicate a little bit too much to one specific thing and
Mm.
everything else kind of goes on the back burner and the back burner turns off and then the stove breaks, you know. So that's the way I describe myself. I've been like that since I was a little kid. I mean, you can ask any of my buddies from when I was in like kindergarten. It's like my entire personality was like sharks. But yeah, it's just it's that personality type is stuck with me into my 20s, which is kind of funny. It's just my interests have obviously changed, but
Yeah.
I am trying to bring a little bit more balance to life. But I think in general, just being very I guess conscientious in other areas of life that I normally wouldn't be motivated to be conscientious in, I think has
Mm.
probably been one of the bigger things for me.
Cool, man. Cool. I don't know if you want to talk about this, but I'm just kind of curious, like, what's your career or income outside of basement bodybuilding?
Yeah, I'll probably I I don't know if I want to talk about that. Not that there, no, I don't. I'm not like
That's fine.
some like
No, it's fine.
gangbang or drug dealer or anything, but it's just a standard day job. I'm in the fitness industry. Mildly, I'm on the fringe of the fitness industry, and I just make a regular income, and then the channel does decent too. Obviously, I'm not maximizing it, and I'm doing that intentionally, but I'm very comfortable for I have a frugal life too. Like my extra money goes into home gym equipment. So
Cool, man. Cool. Yeah, we were talking about that. Me and Jeffrey were talking about that, like being a minimalist and not spending your money on a bunch of bullshit just creates room, you know?
Yeah, you guys crushed it in that podcast. Yeah, he reminds me so much of one of my buddies from high school. Just entire personality, lifestyle, like everything he says, I'm like, this I know this exact personality type from somewhere else. Yeah, I think both you guys are kind of like that. I respect it so much because to be in a spot that say Jeffrey's in, where he's got an incredible YouTube channel, and I think he's got a top tier channel, and he's such a good thinker, and he's able to take in all these perspectives, and he's built a great foundation and a great following that he could sell out like this and just make a ton of money, but he wouldn't. And
Yeah,
whether he didn't, if he was to make a bunch of money and be super successful, like I think, like he said earlier, yeah, you wouldn't know. And I think that's the type of person that is a good role model to look up to for a lot of people, in my opinion.
100%. And like for me, it's like I drive a really cheap car. I live in a humble house. I barely spend I don't never eat out. I don't need to eat out. I like cooking my own food. I don't like all my hobbies are, I have a gym pass. I go to like the nicest gym in town. That's like my baller moment, I guess. That's like what I
As
do.
it should be. Yeah.
Like yeah, like I'm gonna go to the nicest gym and I'm gonna eat healthy foods. But even then it's like I eat fresh produce, meat, eggs, like pretty basic stuff. I think like a lot of I don't know. Like I feel like, like with like people like Andrew Tate getting super popular and all these like very I think a lot of young men might go down the path of like, hey, you need to buy the nicest car to get the girl. Um, you need to do this. But in my experience, man, if you find like the right woman, like she's isn't gonna care. I don't know if that's your experience. I'm sure your relationship isn't based on your financial success.
No, I was dirt poor when I met my girlfriend. So no, it's not. But I think ultimately what it comes down to, if we're going to talk about that, would just be it's potential. And people talk about this all the time. Oh, you need the money, you need this, but it's like no, you just need the potential. And a good girl and a girl that's right for you can see that potential in you because you'll be able to express that around her. And I think that's the exact situation that I fell into because I was fully committed to just being completely single. I was like, yeah, I'm just going to do it. I'm not a ladies man. I'm just going to be a man's man loner and just lift and give shit as fuck. Maybe come back to the earth and I'm like 25 or something.
I feel like that's like every guy always goes through that shit. They go through like a rough breakup or something fucked up happens. They're like, I'm never gonna talk to a woman again. I'm just gonna fucking lift, just sigma male my way through life. And then a girl,
Yeah.
pretty girl comes up. Hi, how's it going? You're like, oh, I changed. I completely changed my mind.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
just kidding.
Give it 3 weeks and you're back to baseline.
Yeah.
No, yeah, it's funny how that happens, and I'm assuming, yeah, I'm sure. I know you have. You were talking about your girlfriend the last podcast. I'm assuming you found her, and you
Yeah.
probably went through something similar to myself, huh?
Yeah. I've been dating her for over 3 years now. And I went through like the whole it was kind of funny too, because when we started dating, I was kind of without going into too much detail, before I met her, I dated a woman for a long time, and she was definitely a little bit like everyone always says that about their ex being like kind of crazy, but it got pretty bad there for a bit. Like I just went through a very like black pilling relationship.
Yeah,
Uh, and after that, I was just like really like it just fucked up my self esteem. Like I had a lot of confidence and I was like trying to talk to girls, but everything I was trying was failing. And I was just like, fuck it. Like I was just in a spot that was
yeah,
pretty rough. So I became kind of like you were saying, where you get into that headspace where you're like, I'm just gonna fucking grind and make everyone fucking. I'm gonna like. It's almost like you're trying to get revenge on someone, but you don't know who. You're just like in that angry, angry masculine rage. Like I'm gonna be so fucking successful. I'm gonna get all the money. I'm gonna get jacked as fuck. And
yeah.
then
No, yeah, I think you put it perfectly.
yeah, but then
Yeah,
you realize that's a bit of a cope. Well, I mean, like use it to use
kind
it.
of.
Yeah, I mean, use it as in like it's good to have that ambition, but eventually, like that's a fuel source that's gonna run out eventually.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah,
I think
maybe that.
the one positive takeaway from the mindset that I used to have back then is that it never messed with my own personal like self-esteem or confidence, which is the strangest thing because I was like, I've always seen myself as like this. I've always seen the potential in myself and I've never had self-doubt like that. And I was always like, damn, like I'm pretty handsome. I was pretty shredded at the time. I'm good. And then I'm like, no girls like me and I don't really have that many friends. But yeah, I'm still good. So I do I hate to shit on my former self, so I do want to give myself some props with that, where I think obviously my mindset was pretty nihilistic and black pilled or whatever you want to call it, kind of just in the dumps at that point. But the self-confidence was still there. I never was like,
Mm.
oh shit, am I ugly or something? Even on like, yeah, I just I'm
Yeah.
happy I never went to
Well,
that spot because
yeah.
that got way downhill.
Yeah, for me, it was never like, maybe I just want to clarify because I was never like, oh, I'm ugly and everyone, no one like, it was more of like, kind of like you, where I was like, I think I'm the shit, but like, it seems like the world's fucking something's going on. Like, I was just missing something. Like, I hated my
Yeah,
job. I hated what I was doing. I felt like, yeah, I don't think it was like, oh, I'm so it wasn't necessarily like an insecurity. It was more of like a just longing for something. Like, something was off. Like, I wasn't, yeah, I think a lot of guys go through that period of just, I don't know, just like emptiness. I think that the passage through the fucking, I guess Jordan Peterson would call that the abyss, you know, like every guy
yeah.
kind of goes through that point, and then I think there's like a part of that that you should integrate into a more like healthy, well balanced person. Um, no, that's all interesting stuff, man. There's something else I was gonna say, but I fucking forget.
Love when that happens.
What was the main thing? Like, wrap that up again so I can remember what I was gonna
We're
say.
talking about just the male loneliness, and then it's like something happens to you, and you're like, "Fuck the world," and everything's just wrong, and I'm right. Just
Yeah, yeah,
taking
yeah.
out anger in the gym.
Yeah, and I was saying like that was like it's not a sustainable fuel source, but it's something that can kind of get you through. Like if you're going through hell, just keep going.
Yeah,
And then, like I went through like a very like kind of like a nihilistic phase when it came to like even training, because I've talked about this on the channel a few times, but I had like a super bad back in my early 20s to the point where like my back was fucked, man. Like I had like chronic pain every day. Like some days it'd be like, oh, it doesn't, like it would get to the point where like, oh, it doesn't constantly hurt all day, but like sometimes it would be like I had like some weird nerve pain issues. Like I went to doctors about it and no one could give me any answers. So I was just like, oh well, I guess I'm fucked. Like this like passion for training is just not gonna happen because I have a fucking 74-year-old back at like 21.
oh,
Yeah, so that was like really bad. And then eventually it was just like I just like kept at it and like tried to learn how to like just watching certain videos about like, hey, maybe if I strengthen this will help. And then eventually it just got to the point where like, oh, like one day, like it was a gradual. I'm like had my bad days got better, bad days got better. Then eventually I was like, holy fuck, my back's like fine. And just like focusing on, strengthening it and like doing like more like focused hypertrophy stuff, like back extensions. And I managed to like heal my back. But man, there was like a few years there when I was like so depressed about just like my body breaking down. Cause like anybody who's had significant back pain, that shit is fucking, it's like the core of your being. Like it's your fucking spine hurting all the time. So that was something I was kind of black pilled, but then I got over it. I just healed myself. Same thing like mentally with like when I guess relationships. I was kind of black pilled and then I found the right girl and then things get better. So anybody who's going through some shit, just fucking keep soldiering on. It's gonna get better.
yeah, it does get better, and it's so tough because I know there's people that are just like me and you in our early 20s that are listening to this, and it's tough to say because there's really no practical advice. Not of course there's some advice we can give you, but like man, I consumed so much content. Some of it wasn't helpful. A lot of it was helpful too, but
Mhm.
it's like you everybody's on their own path and like
Yeah.
generic advice isn't going to help you. So you just have to I think the biggest piece of advice I could give to people is just find a good role model and
Mhm.
don't try and emulate that person, but try and emulate certain characteristics and traits that that person has and understand why you want to develop those traits. Also take care of the way you look. that's important to your identity.
100%,
You want to
100%.
make sure you look good. You want to make sure your body looks good. And ultimately, you have to be self-aware. You have to look inside, take a day just to sit down and think like, who do I want to be? What do I want to be? And
Mhm.
envision what that person is. Do everything you can to fulfill that potential. The tough part about so much advice, and I hope this resonates with at least someone out there, is you're stuck in this spot and you get stuck on the mainstream self-help kind
Yeah.
of train. And the I think that the vast majority of people looking for self-help, they're just not on the track of the becoming the person that they want to be and actualizing that. And you get this advice like, oh, just go take a cold shower, or like just start waking up earlier. And it's
Well,
like,
you must have been reading the same books I was, bro.
yeah, probably. And it's
Wake
like, yeah, well, that stuff has its time and place and it could help you build good habits and stuff. It's like
Mhm.
if you don't even know who you want to become, what's that going to do for you? So then you try
Yeah.
these methods and you're like, well, this isn't doing shit for me. I'm just stuck. And then eventually you stumble upon a good role model, or you just start to realize certain characteristics that you want to develop, or you make something happen. You put an inch on your arms and you're like, holy shit, I can transform myself. And yeah, like something just clicks and everything starts to kind of snowball into a better mindset. And that's ultimately why I'm doing bodybuilding the channel. Is obviously I love building my body, but it's also it's a lot to build the mind too. And
Oh,
that's something that
100%.
once I get all of my training ideas out there and I have a little bit more life experience, mindset's going to be something that's much more involved with the channel.
Oh yeah, man. Um, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there. I keep like listening to you, like I'm almost like watching a video, and then I forget what I'm gonna say back. I'm like, yeah, interesting, awesome, and then I just don't
I
know.
Sometimes I get to like I have a hard time saying things, like very concisely. I like to say the full thing and keep going and building, and that's
I'm
how
like,
my videos
I'm
turn into
like,
one take
yeah,
clips.
I'm following your conversation. Then you stop talking, and I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I'm supposed to say something. But okay. um, like yeah, that advice you were giving to people, like the mainstream self help stuff. Like a lot of it is, a lot of it is just fluffy nonsense. Obviously, there are certain people. I guess someone who comes to mind is like Jordan Peterson. Like just like
Yeah,
the very basic advice he gives, like get clean your room, get your life in order. Just like dad advice, pretty much. Just like that basic stuff. Like, but if you stumble on the wrong role models or people that are, and there's one guy in particular. Do you know who Aubrey Marcus is?
no,
No, he's like a he's like a super. You should actually look him up after this podcast. He's like a super like um, new age like training kind of like spiritual guru. Like he does a lot of like psychedelics and stuff like that.
mm,
And I was really into that at the time because I grew up religious, but I kind of like fell out of the faith a little bit. So I was kind of looking for the void, like looking for God in other places. So I was doing mushrooms and like acid and shit in my early 20s. And that led me to a really bad spot, to the point where I was like
mm,
taking way too much, and eventually I had like the most like nightmarish mushroom trip. So like it was like pretty much that was like my breaking point, where I was in like a very dark nihilistic spot. And I just kept I was not only was I was trying to help myself, but it was counterproductive. Like I was putting myself lower, lower, lower. And then I got to this point where I had this like nightmarish mushroom trip that like fucked me up for like legitimately like 2 years. Like I had to like it like fucking I had like depersonalization and like super crazy anxiety and shit from it for
yeah,
so long.
that's really bad. Yeah, depersonalization is fucked up.
Yeah, it was fucked
That's
up.
bottom barrel shit.
And,
Yeah,
and then it like red pilled me in like a positive way, to the point I was just like, dude, everything I'm doing is fucked. Like everything that mainstream culture is telling me is fucked. Then I started just becoming very way more conservative in my thinking, kind of like getting away from a lot of like the social justice politics and stuff like that. And I know me and you follow some of the same pages, uh,
oh
like that,
shit. Yeah.
yeah, like Trad West and stuff like that.
Yeah, I just followed them. I just what a great little page. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
You might span your clothes at me that are super ugly, but I love their posts. I mean, what a positive page. And I hate Instagram. I'm just gonna be straight up. So
Yeah.
my Instagram's just like a meme page. Not actually, but it's just random like
Yeah.
280 pixel pictures of me flexing in the basement. Uh, but that account, like I stumbled across them. I'm like, this is the first account where I've actually looked at their stuff and felt like a genuinely positive reaction on Instagram. It's no like jealousy or anything, no like upsetness or no like weird envy or like making me feel inferior to someone else. I'm like, that is an actual good account to be following. So I followed him and I'm like, fuck it. Like
Yeah.
it's good content to see.
Just a good wholesome account, and you don't see a lot of
Yeah.
that. You don't see a lot of that kind of stuff being pushed to young men. And you go on these platforms, and like I don't know about you, I actually posted about it. My Instagram like explore page is pretty much like borderline pornography. Like it's just like asses in my face. Fucking, you go on TikTok, it's the same thing. Like that's got to be fucking with our heads, man.
It's so bad for you.
Especially as a dude, it's like of course that shit's gonna. It's like it like triggers something in you, and then you're like, oh and then it's like next thing you know, you're like watching porn, or it's like this constant like they're just trying to fucking yeah, man. It's like social media is just a fucking psyop. We're all like it's fucking us up.
Yeah, it's so bad. And then you become numb to it. And that's bad. That's a bad path, man. And it's not just the tits and asses you see on Instagram and whatnot and TikTok. It's even the good things too. It's like when you keep seeing like say your goal physique, when you keep seeing other people with that goal physique, or you keep seeing other people with money or all these things that you want, then you live through them and you see it so much that that is the reward that triggers the reward in your brain, and you lose your desire. So it's like you did a digital detox. What was that, back in the summer or something? And I'm
Yeah.
sure you came back from that more motivated than you've ever been. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's just my assumption.
Yeah, like even when I go, like every year I go on this canoe trip and I'm just like no phone, 4 days on a river camping.
Yeah, I
And
watched that. It looked magical.
yeah. Yeah, man. If you want to come up to Canada in the summer, I'll have you.
Yeah, that'd be sick.
um, but it's like actually that'd be kind of sweet having like a natty noble assembly, like a
Oh, 100%. Yeah, we got to do it at some point. Get the noble baddies together. Could you imagine?
that'd be wild. But no, man, I didn't use my phone for 4 days, and you just like come back, you're like, fuck, the internet's weird.
Oh, it's good stuff, dude. It's good
Yeah.
stuff.
It's tough though too at the same time because it's like you're using the internet to, do stuff like this. Like
Yeah.
there's a way of using it in a balanced way that's positive, but at the same time, it's like there's a part of me that's like maybe I should just do YouTube and not even be on Instagram anymore because Instagram's the one that kind of sucks you in, and with all like I think like the very like short bite-sized content is very bad for you, because like it's like we're talking about like the ass and tits in your face all day. Like I'm not gonna go on YouTube and look up ass and tits, and it's not gonna be in my
Hope
face.
not. Yeah.
I fucking hope not. Like you'd be a fucking weirdo if you did. It's like, yeah, sure. All of us have fucking watched pornography once or twice, and some people more than others, but it's like you go on Instagram not looking for that, but then it just finds you. And it's like then it's there. And that's the fucking problem. It's like we're just having all this shit just thrown at us all the time.
Yeah, I think with something like YouTube, their algorithm tends to work well. Obviously, they do promote a lot of BS mainstream content, but we're pretty aware of that. We're not going to be like, oh, a 26-minute video of Andrew Tate talking about cigars. Like, oh, let me watch that entire thing. It's like, yeah, this shit sucks. But then
Yeah.
it's like on Instagram, you get a 30-second clip of Andrew Tate talking about his Bugatti, and then another one. Then your entire explore feed is him doing all these different things, and then this fitness influencer, and you're like just overwhelmed, and you can't even think straight, and it gives you ADD. And then you go on YouTube, and it's like everything's long form. One thing I like to do is go on full screen, so you're not being distracted on the right column all the time with the
Yeah.
suggestions.
Yeah. Yeah.
I find that helps a lot, and I even pay for YouTube Premium so I can just turn my phone off.
Me
It's like
too.
$17 a month. Just turn my phone off and listen to it. Like
Yeah.
that's the type of stuff that I like.
I do that too. Yeah.
That's nice.
No, it's definitely something I've been thinking about. Just using Instagram very I was actually gonna just hop off it. That's why I had you on WhatsApp and stuff. So I was like, oh, I want to stay connected with people, but I don't know if I want to use this app anymore. But maybe just a little bit. One other thing too is when you're on Instagram, you're getting a bunch of stuff you don't want just because there's like the shorts and stuff that come at you. So you'll see like an Andrew Tate video, and maybe you think Andrew Tate's bullshit, and you're like, oh, fuck this guy. Like I see him all over the place, like his whatever. But then the ideas still get into your head. So these ideas are still getting into your head, and then subconsciously you're just like, wait a minute, maybe that, you start. It's weird, man. Like you don't realize you're getting indoctrinated to a thing until like it's completely like subconscious.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you're onto something there because it's like what you wake up, you see your girlfriend for 20 minutes, you go to work, check Instagram 20 times at work, and you spend a cumulative hour and a half with Andrew Tate throughout the day. And it's like, by the time the day's over, it's like you're like half dating Andrew Tate, half dating your girlfriend, and
Well, well, that shit kind of affects your relationship too, because it's gonna affect you if you're seeing a bunch of fucking like negative content, or if you're seeing a bunch of like you like tits and ass in your face all fucking day. That's gonna affect like how you view your girlfriend. You know what I'm saying? Like
yeah,
that's what that's why it's super toxic. Like I feel like a lot of these platforms are gonna destroy relationships. Like that's why relationships are so. That's why
already
people are.
started.
Yeah, like people are so black pilled about relationships in general, and that's definitely a reason. People are talking about like open relationships and
Oh,
monogamy is dead, and I'm like, well, if you want to go down that path, like you have fun with that. But
yeah. Well, it's that's a bad path to be going down. And I'm no expert on it, but it doesn't take a genius to figure out why that
yeah,
doesn't end well.
no, 100%. So yeah, that's Instagram. They're fucking destroying our brains, man.
Yeah, and I find it's like you get to a point. Obviously, I'm experienced enough now, and I have enough identity and confidence and whatnot at this point to like be able to assess all this stuff critically. But even then, it's like even if I was to see, and we're just using Andrew Tate for the example today, but if I was to see something like him over and over, I can logically like deconstruct what he's saying in my brain. But
Mhm.
then it's just going to make me like pissed off and resentful because now I'm getting spammed with all this. It's like
Yeah.
I remember when, yeah, when politics are big every election year, and then I keep seeing all of like this just garbage headlines and whatnot. Like you'd see some
Oh yeah.
like perfectly emotionally manipulated like MSNBC headline, and you're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
what the fuck is this?" And then it just
Yeah.
it ruffles your feathers, and that's what it's designed to do. And then you look at the incentives behind media and all that kind of stuff. It's designed to get you emotional. It's all entertainment, so you have to be
Yeah.
able to see past that. And I think there's so much value in YouTube channels, underground YouTube channels. Like part of me wishes my YouTube channel just stays small forever. Like I want to reach everybody that would be interested in my content that would benefit from it, but no more. That's
Yeah.
kind of what I'm after.
Yeah, that's the way to be, man. No, that's cool. That's cool. Well, we're an hour in and we haven't really talked training all that much, so we could get into some training questions here. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, you got a couple.
I did write down some stuff. I actually watched your video on um like that Alpha Destiny response.
Yeah, minimalism.
And you said something, it was kind of a hot take, and it was something I was actually talking about with someone like 2 days ago. And it was isolation movements actually feeling harder than compound movements. And I told someone that I'm like, dude, I swear to God, like doing like bicep curls to failure hurts me more than like going all out on a set of like, or just bench or like something like overhead press. Like overhead press, it's like, I know when I've failed. Like it's very like, on a compound movement where it's like, yeah, that was my last rep. But with like bicep curls or like calf raises, isolation movements, it's like the amount of pain that you have to endure, it can be actually like worse for me. Like like for me, I would say isolation movements are harder, which some people
I
might be like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Surprisingly, I would agree, and I think and obviously everybody's going to have different opinions. Everybody has different sensations and pain tolerances and whatnot. But I think for the vast majority of people, if you think compounds are much harder than isolation lifts, you're probably just not training isolations right. And that's a foundation. That's a pillar of my channel, is that people aren't training isolations right. We're not viewing them in the right light. So I think when you do take a muscle in an isolation lift to muscular failure, that is brutal. That is so painful. It's just it's torture to most people, but once you can kind of see the benefit of that, it's just a test of legit just mental fortitude.
Yeah.
That's the best way I can put it. It's like, yeah, I've been there. I've repped out 405 on squats and been winded, and yeah, do your lungs burn a little bit? Like, yeah, does your back start to give out a little bit? Like, sure, but that's much easier than like a set of calf raises until you can't do it anymore, or a set of bicep curls or overhead extensions, and you like can't breathe because your lungs are being constricted and your arms are over your head and your triceps are screaming and you're just like you're shaking, like your hands are shaking on the ropes, and you're just like that muscular failure is something else.
Yeah,
Like
it's
true muscular failure.
even just like calf raises. Like I did a set of calf raises a few days ago, and I straight up like got nauseous. I was like, just the amount of pain in the calves. Yeah, I just thought that hot take was interesting because someone was like, it was actually my little brother I was talking to, and he's just like,
Mm.
dude, are you serious? Like, yeah, man. Like if you take a set of an isolation movement to true failure, where you're just doing like fucking baby reps at the end and just, what would you call that? I guess like a mechanical drop set or whatever, or
Yeah.
like you're going
Yeah,
beyond failure.
partials past failure, mechanical drop.
Partials, yeah, all that
Yeah,
shit. Like all
all of
just
them.
just fucking going to the point where you literally cannot take the pain anymore. And then but with those smaller movements, I feel like you can always go, you can always hold it for another second. You can always go a little bit further. Like you could literally sit there for like 5 minutes just fucking doing these tiny little reps, burning out the muscle. But
Oh,
with
yeah.
compounds, it's a lot more simple. Like it's a lot more black and white when it comes to like, no, that was failure. Like when you're doing like a dumbbell bench press, once you get to here and you can't come back up, it's like, well, I'm done. Like
Yeah, like, think about, like a set of, like, barbell rows to failure versus, like, a set of stretched wrist curls to failure. Like, I'm sorry, but barbell rows just like, your traps just don't burn. Your trap it doesn't hurt when you take a movement, even if you take it a little bit past failure, it's just not the same as, like I don't know if
Mhm.
you've experimented. I'm not sure if I invented this lift, but a stretched wrist curl where you're doing a wrist curl, but you lower the dumbbell or barbell into your fingertips, and you curl it up and then do a wrist curl like this.
Oh wow.
But that is the most painful thing, and I almost chipped a tooth doing it because I take them basically to the point where I can't budge it at all, and then I kind of forgot that I did them, and I went upstairs, and I this is a few minutes later, I went to go grab my water bottle, and I had no coordination because my arms were, like, shaking, and I thought I chipped my tooth on the water bottle. I'm like, "Yeah, that's tough. It's brutal."
Damn. And you also brought up in that video, you're talking about the deadlift, and you're saying the deadlift stimulates a lot of muscles, but it doesn't necessarily, or that's not the best way to look at it for hypertrophy. It's more of like, how do you pick the muscle and then you figure out the best way to stimulate that muscle.
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah. So
that's my training
that,
philosophy,
okay.
essentially.
Yeah. So what I wanted to ask you is, if I were to like take that, maybe to play the devil's advocate, um, why wouldn't I just only do isolations if that was it? You know what I'm saying? Like, if let's say like if I wanted to just stimulate my hamstrings the most, I would just do like seated hamstring curls rather than RDLs.
I would disagree with that because I think some muscles do grow better through compound lifts, and I think hamstrings and quads are a great example of that.
Mhm.
Same with the lats, the traps, forearms, calves, bicep, tricep, side delts, muscles like that are probably best grown through. Not probably, they are best grown through isolation lifts in most people, but it, yeah, I mean, compound lifts, and it's all about what lift is best and what mechanic is best to apply the most tension to that muscle. And for something like chest, like, yeah, for sure, you could isolate your chest with a fly, but I do think a heavy stretched weighted press is it is a compound lift that would give you more bang for your buck. So there are muscles that are best targeted through compounds and muscles that are best targeted through
Mm,
an
okay,
actual
okay.
isolation
Okay,
lift.
so, like, yeah, I wouldn't just because I guess what you're saying is there's certain movements, like, there's no way you'd be able to do a chest fly heavy enough to the point where, like, if you're doing, like, a really heavy stretch dumbbell press, like, you're gonna actually be stimulating the chest more.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I would agree with that.
Even though, like, maybe in, like, a chest fly, you feel your chest a little bit more. Because like,
You
for
get
me
you get more sensation, but probably less overall tension is what I'd say, and it's not as optimal of just a movement pattern. And
Mhm.
your chest, the primary function is to push things, and while it does do a fly, it's like you kind just instinctively you can tell that the press is going to do more for you.
Oh,
So you can look at the science and the biomechanics and whatnot, but I think it's almost instinctive at that point.
yeah, 100%. And, like, when I watch you train, you're still doing squats, you're still doing heavy presses, like, you're still doing compound movements. Um,
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people don't think I do, which I
yeah, like,
think is
I've watched your training, and I was just yeah, because there's some of these people that have come out and been like, "No, only do isolations and these very, like, smaller movements." But for me, like, what I've kinda come to find is through trial and error, it's like, if you're focused on hypertrophy, I feel like you can take the big movements, like press, like squat, hinges, and just, like, adjust them to, like, a more hypertrophy focus. Like, I don't do conventional deadlifts, first because I don't really like them that much, but I really love RDLs, and I my hamstrings fucking scream, my glutes scream, and that I'm still doing a heavy hinge, but it's just, like, since I'm doing, like, a hypertrophy, like, my main focus is hypertrophy, I'm doing, a certain variation that is more hypertrophy focused. Like, I think there's a difference between, like, just doing, like, very easy or not easy, sorry, but like just doing isolation movements to get big versus like doing the compounds, but doing them in a way that is more hypertrophy focused.
I agree, and I think you're right about making a compound movement. You're what muscle are you targeting with that compound movement is the first question I ask, and then how can we optimize it to hit that muscle group? So I think the whole compound versus isolation thing, I don't necessarily like the terms that much because it's about the muscle, it's not about the joint when you're looking at hypertrophy. So uh, I think the best way to look at it would be let's call an isolation movement. And obviously there's downsides to this view too. So I'm not saying we should actually do this, but I think sometimes the way that I like to look at it is like maybe we call isolation movements that might target a bunch of muscles, but only like isolate in terms of stimulate growth one specific muscle. I think an RDL is a good example of that. Like, is it gonna hit the traps? Is it going to hit the forearms and the calves a little bit? Like, sure, but it's not going to stimulate growth outside of the hamstrings, probably some glutes and a little bit of spinal erectors, low back area. So
Mhm.
I think that's a good way to look at it. The joints, obviously, it is important in terms of fatigue management. Like single jointed movements just simply aren't as fatiguing as multi jointed movements in most cases. So I think there's still merit to that in terms of programming and fatigue management. But when we're talking about hitting a certain muscle group and actually stimulating growth, that's another story. And I think that's where there's nuance to the conversation: compound isolation, fatigue management, stimulus, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm. Um, yeah, like for squats in particular, I know you do like a more like upright plat squat.
Yeah.
Um, how like what's like kind of a way that someone could I don't know, because we're all built a little bit different. Maybe we can go into that a little bit. So say you're just trying to make or how can you judge if a movement is good for targeting a muscle? Like what if you say you're a beginner and you don't really know like what you're looking for, like what it should feel like? How can you judge if something is good for hypertrophy or not?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's no one answer I'm going to be able to give on this because every movement's going to be different. Same with every muscle. But I think if you look at it from a perspective of one sensation, there is value to sensation. It's not the end all be all, but do you feel like that muscle is giving out? Uh, Number two would be what is that movement known to target most? And that can generally steer you in the right direction. From there, the joint that that muscle is working with, what's the range of motion that that joint goes through? And this is where a lot of people will say, all right, well, bench press crushes your triceps. And I'm like, well, the way most people bench, your elbow gets to a 90-degree angle. And to
Mm.
fully stimulate the tricep, you probably want to go past that. So when you start doing a JM press or a full range of motion push down or overhead extension, then you kind of realize like, yeah, the bench press is probably inadequate for actually targeting your triceps. So the biggest thing for me would probably just be sensation combined with joint angles, and range of motion is a subcategory of that.
Like I've never done bench press and thought to myself, "Oh, my triceps are getting fried." I don't even feel my triceps. Well,
Well,
there's
that's
yeah,
good.
yeah. It's like funny because like there's certain things where you could get a wicked mind muscle connection, but you're not really necessarily like overloading or you're not really like, yeah, it's kind of weird. Like I could sit here and just like flex my bicep with a pink dumbbell and be like, "Oh yeah, I'm really feeling my bicep." But there's a difference between like that and like actually loading it to stimulate growth. But it's a balance because some people will like be like, "Oh, well, mind muscle connection doesn't matter at all," but like it definitely matters. Like if I'm doing like a heels elevated plat squat, and I'm feeling my quads like scream in the setting. I'm doing a back squat, but it's more like my quads are actually giving out rather than if I'm like more like hinged over. It's just gonna kind of feel like I'm just getting tired. More just like fatigue than anything.
Yeah, spot on.
And I think like there's certain people that like just take things. It's weird how like the fitness industry, everybody takes things to such ridiculous extremes. It's like, oh, this isn't right. So then the complete opposite is right. And I think that's a problem because I'm like, when I first started listening to your stuff, I'm like, oh no, this all makes sense. And then I was kind of wondering, I was like, then I saw you train. I'm like, oh, he just trains with like compound movements, but in a way that's like hypertrophy focused. Like it's really nothing super out there. I think the important thing is just like taking like you always like shit on the term accessory lift. I think that's a very important thing because I feel like a lot of people don't take their isolation movements very seriously. And we were talking about that earlier. I feel like isolations can be harder than compounds. And
And
if you
that's
want,
why people don't take them seriously, because they're hard, let's say for the sake of the argument, they're equally as hard as compounds, but we're told they're less important. Just focus on the big compounds, just focus on the big three, big five, or whatever. That's all you need. Do a couple isolations to finish off the triceps. And I'm like, all right, well, you do your bench, you do your dumbbell bench, your dumbbell flies, your chest is toast, your triceps are kind of fatigued from doing some half partial range of motion pressing through the tricep range of motion is what I mean. And then you're tired from the end of your workout. You're going into a movement that you're told is an accessory to, as in it's less important. It's a tiny piece of something that's much bigger and more important. So one, it's the end of the workout, so you're going to half-ass it. Two, you're systemically fatigued from going through a full workout. Three, you're locally fatigued in your triceps, so not enough to actually stimulate growth. That's a recipe for disaster. Why do you think so many intermediate lifters have under 16-inch arms, but they're benching and deadlifting and squatting a bunch of weight? And I think I'm a good example of that. Where I posted my physique, I was transparent. I'm like, guys, do not go down this path. Look at my physique: 182 pounds, 1,400 total, like forearms that look like they've never been trained before. You don't want to go down this path, and you'll get the response a lot of the time, like, "Oh, you're just a genetic, you're just on the extreme end of the genetic spectrum." And I'm like, at first I kind of thought that. And then the more I train for hypertrophy, I'm like, well, now my arms are just about 17 inches and they look kind of round and bubbly, more like a bodybuilder.
Mhm.
And I'm doing curls and extensions hard 3 times a week. And now all of a sudden my arm genetics don't seem so bad. Like, what's the
Mhm.
truth here? And I think what we're realizing is that training is far more important than genetics. And I don't think genetics are really that important at all. I think there's a factor to them, and I think some people are just more gifted than others. But I think when you look at the individual and the training versus genetics, training is going to dictate so much more. And I think training and programming and technique and proximity to failure and that kind of stuff is brutally underrated. People look at genetics and diet more than they look at their training, and that's why people don't have the results they want. Training is going to be key.
Hmm. Well, I guess one thing I'll ask you is when you're when you're tracking your progress or tracking progressive overload, your goal isn't strength. I'm the same as you. My goal is hypertrophy, but I'm using strength as a metric or like a measurement of hypertrophy. Like I'm trying to beat the logbook every time. So that's adding reps, adding weight, adding more volume if necessary.
Yeah.
Um, like how do you, if you're chasing this like crazy, like you were absolutely strong as fuck, but you didn't necessarily have like the muscle mass.
Right.
So how do you like track your progress? You see what I'm saying? Like if you're
Yep.
getting stronger on these lifts, like how you're getting stronger, but you're not getting bigger. It's like how do you progress from there? You know what I'm saying? Because like I'd be like I'm just trying to think for myself. Like I'm like right now I'm doing like dumbbell bench press, like overhead press, lateral raises. Like I'm just thinking about all the movements I do. And I'm like every day I go in, I just try to get stronger, do another rep, progressively overload, just like basic stuff. But like if I wasn't getting bigger from that, like why were you not getting bigger from the bench, squat, and deadlift? Because some people might be confused.
Yeah, well, I think part of it's going to be just neurological, and part of it's going to be technique adaptability, and obviously part of it's going to be it's going to be a little bit of an increase in muscle mass too. But it's just the you're not the point that I'm trying to get at is you're not choosing where the muscle mass is going because you're picking a lift. You're not targeting that muscle the best that you possibly can. So for me,
Mm,
when I was low bar squatting, like I my spinal erectors and my glutes were fucking jacked, but my
okay.
quads were still really small. And I have a video of myself. I want to say it was like a 425 double or something, and I'm like my quads are small. I'm like I work with little less than 200 pounds on plat squats for now for my working sets, and my quads are mogging what I used to do. And you can keep getting stronger on these lifts, especially something like a sumo deadlift, where that it caters to our ego, especially the skinnier guys, because for whatever reason we're yet to find out, they just have better leverages with it. Which is when I was 180 pounds, I wasn't skinny, like I was still a pretty muscular guy, but I was just a pure intermediate. Um, in terms of muscle mass, and I know that's kind of arbitrary, but what happens is you start to just get so refined and so good at these movements, and you can get stronger without getting much bigger because strength is more of a skill than size is. You have to simulate growth through taking that muscle with to a good proximity to failure with good technique and sufficient volume and frequency. But to get stronger, I think it's a little bit more of a skill than a lot of people are willing to admit, or maybe than a lot more
Mm,
than a lot of people realize. And you can get from like going from a 200 deadlift to a 400 deadlift will get you some good growth. Not optimally, in my opinion, but going from a 400 to a 600 probably won't do that much for you. Like at a certain point, specializing in a movement is kind of redundant. Um, and we don't know all the reasons of why that happens, but it's very obvious when you look at natural power builders or power lifters that that can be the case.
mm. Okay, I think you clarified some things. So, you're talking about, the deadlift, which kind of doesn't necessarily take any particular muscle through like to failure or close to failure. It's more of like a systemically fatiguing movement. But if you were to like get stronger on like a plat squat, that's when your quads would start growing. So maybe it's just like more
Yeah.
like exercise. Like you're still. I guess like what I'm just trying to wrap my head around, just trying to figure out exactly what you're saying is you're still going to be chasing strength, as in like using strength as a measurement, but it's more about like you want to be doing that in the context of a lift that's actually going to like target the muscle. Right? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, if you can get as strong as you want on a lift, but if the lift isn't sufficient in terms of stimulating muscle growth, you're not you're kind of shit out of luck. So for
Yeah. Like if
myself, yeah, sorry.
sorry, like if I'm getting strong as fuck on a hack squat, like I think like if your quads aren't getting
Yeah,
stimulated on a hack squat, I don't know what the fuck you're doing because that's a extremely painful, right in the quads kind of movement. So
yep.
if you're loading up the plates on that and you're beating the logbook on that, there's like no way in hell your quads aren't growing. Like,
Right.
would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And I
Yeah.
think the only issue that I have with um beating the logbook and whatnot is I think it's a good starting point, but I don't think that should be your end goal in terms of mindset. And I do think that's somewhat controversial. So I don't think that's I don't want to recommend that to everybody. I'm just saying this is the way that I view it. And I don't look at my logbook because I know proximity to failure, I know technique, and I know consistency. So I'm at the point where I think the way that I train is in at least for myself, the peak of what it gets. Obviously, I have a ton more to learn. So I'm not naive in that sense, but I think when you're at the point where you know how hard you can possibly push yourself and you don't need a specific number to like target every set, then
Mhm.
you're gonna be progressing. And I think you're probably at a point where you can start to train a little bit like that too. And I'm not recommending that, but I think it's a good spot to be in where you know you can just use your logbooks to look at every few months to look back at for accountability. And
Mhm.
obviously I still do that, but I'm not in the day-to-day or week-to-week stuff with my training logs. I'm just using them once every month, 2 months. I'll take a look back and see what's stalling and progressing. But I think we should all be striving for that because then it emphasizes and it incentivizes hard training and good proximity to failure. And it doesn't emphasize strength because I think strength, if you're not self aware of this and if you're not even just aware of how this happens, it's very, very easy to cheat yourself into artificial progressive overload. And I think that's a path you don't want to go down because now you
Would
think you're progressing, but your sets are actually getting less stimulative than before. So you might plateau, you might even like lose a little bit of size, but
Yeah, when you say like artificial progressive overload, do you mean like
progress, artificial progress.
artificial progress? Sorry. Do you mean like kind of like almost like form changes? You start swinging the weight just to get the nut. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
anything along the lines of that for sure.
Yeah. That's
More
interesting.
people do it than you think. It's pretty
So,
common.
so you do like an intuitive that's like intuitive training where you're not necessarily like checking your logbook. I kind of do that to a certain extent, but I track all my main movements,
Mhm.
and then when I do my isolation movements, or I guess you know like to use main movements versus isolation, but I'm tracking like compounds and stuff like that. More movements that I guess movements that you wouldn't want to take to true failure because like you got a barbell on your back, it might not be the smartest thing to take to failure.
Right.
Um, versus like you're doing like a cable curl. And sometimes I won't like I've been not tracking my the isolation movements and just like taking them to the point of like as much pain as I can tolerate. But that's interesting that you don't track or you're not like obsessed with the logbook. Like that's like your I would say that is kind of controversial because a lot of people are very logbook focused, like one more rep, progressive
Yeah,
over.
well, the funny part about it is I do use it for accountability. I don't stress about it whatsoever. So Uh, the funny part is I log my stretched wrist curls. Like I do these things where nobody would even think about tracking them. I just don't have to look at it because I know I'm training hard enough to progress on them, and that's why I keep growing. And if my measurements are going up every month, then do I really need to look at my training log? Like I know it's going up. And
Yeah, that's almost
I think other people do that the opposite way, where they'll look at those strength numbers and they'll say, "All right, well, I'm definitely going up," and I'm like, "Well, how much do we know? How much of that is actual progress? How much of that is artificial progress?" And I think when you're taking body weight and measurements and progress photos, and you can get a pretty good visual on body fat, your waist measurement relative to your arm measurements, to your chest, your calves, your quads, forearms, all this stuff, it's pretty objective. So for me,
mm,
yeah, our chest measurements and sometimes shoulder measurements going to be a little bit inaccurate or fluctuate a little bit, sure. But if my arms are an eighth of an inch bigger month over month, why do I need to look at my logbooks, you know?
yeah, you're tracking progress in a different yeah, you're tracking progress through your measurements. That's
For
interesting.
hypertrophy. Yeah, it's the way I
Yeah,
see it.
that's cool, man. That's cool. Um, yeah, I guess that's kind of like people who don't necessarily track their calories, but they're tracking their morning weight and they see their weight going up. They don't necessarily
Al
have to track. Does
Also
that
what
make
I do. Yeah. Yeah,
also,
so
that's
so the way I see it, yeah, that's actually a really good point because
maybe a good
measuring
analogy?
your weight in the morning and measuring your muscles is if everything there is going well, then we're good. We'll just keep doing what we're doing. If those are not going well, let's take a look at your training logs, or let's take a look at your macros. Pay attention to that for a day, a week, 2 weeks, a month, and
Mhm.
then get to know what the right thing is. And then you can try and break away from it and see if you can go without it. So I do think long term, and this isn't for beginners, try and beat the book. That's a good thing to be striving after, and refine your technique at the same time. But understand where you're at and understand what you should be striving to chase. And for me, that's measurements. And for me, it's when I know that my arms are measured at 16 point whatever inches, I'm going to train harder because I do not want to have that same size next month. Like, holding yourself accountable and having systems like that, I think is going to be key. So when I'm coaching people, that's my biggest thing is like, first of the month, get those measurements in. And when you know you have to measure a month from now, you're like, shit, well, I better get my fucking work in and
Yeah.
smash my arms and smash every other
Shit,
muscle group
man.
I'm trying to grow.
Shit, man. That's interesting. That's like that's an approach that I haven't really heard a lot of people talk about.
Which I think is crazy. I do think that's crazy. It's hypertrophy training. I think I I don't know where it all stems from, but I think people are too focused on strength. And
Mm.
I think what people genuinely want, not everybody, but I think there's a lot of people that want hypertrophy that just don't necessarily admit it. And I think the predominant intelligent fitness YouTuber is strength oriented. I think.
Even if they're technically like a bodybuilding channel, is that what you're telling? Is that what you're saying?
Sometimes, like, I
Some.
do think there are channels like yeah, let's take a look at some of the big channels, but shit, I don't follow them anymore, so I wouldn't know too much. But yeah, you look at something like Jeff Nippard, where he's kind of in the middle. He does a little bit of both. I
Yeah.
think he's more of a hypertrophy guy, but he still talks a lot about strength too. And I think what I'm not a fan of mixing the two. I'm really not. I'm a pure hypertrophy guy, and I think when you start to get caught up in strength numbers, that bleeds into the rest of your training. And for some reason, it's always the strength stuff that takes priority over the hypertrophy stuff, and it's gonna breed inferior results. And I am a believer in that. I don't think you can do both optimally. And I think if you want both, you should do both. There's nothing wrong with power building, but if you think power building is going to be better than bodybuilding, I don't think your mindset is in the right spot.
Mhm.
And I know it's kind of against the grain and controversial, but let's face it, I'm here with new ideas, and I'm not here to mold to the crowd. I want to put my true thoughts out here, and
No, I
I'm
think
saying
that's
them
good.
because I think they can help people.
No, that's good, man. One thing I guess I want to ask is, let's say someone. Okay, so you said you're using the logbook as accountability, kind of like a rough guide. Um, and let's say your measurements aren't going up. What are you going to do? Like, are you going to come back to the logbook and go, okay, well, I've kind of, or is that when you're going to kind of assess maybe like the strength and or maybe not the strength, but like just the progression, strength,
Yeah,
whatever,
well,
whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
yeah, well, I would take a look at body weight. I take a look at my strength numbers and see what's going on. Like, if there's a lift that I've had in my program for 12 weeks and I'm hitting about the same reps, in the same weight and everything, that's probably an issue. And that's where you have to diagnose from there. And every situation's different. Like, is it a lift thing? Is it a mindset thing? Is it a essentially it's going to come down to something like that. Does it need to be rotated? Is it not a good lift for me? Is my technique wrong? Did I cheat my technique? If I got stronger on a bunch of lifts, my arms are the same size, it's probably a good sign of I'm not eating enough and my body weight's probably the same. Or if my body weight's increased and my measurements still aren't up, that's probably a case of me cheating my technique a little bit. So that's the way that I see it.
I like the fact that you're just like a purist when it comes to hypertrophy, because I think like there's so many people that, yeah, like a lot of people that want to get big, they do train like power lifters, and I'll definitely see that. Um, I think for me personally, I'm kind of like in the middle where it's like I don't consider myself a power builder. I consider myself like just a natural bodybuilder. Like that's the goal.
A natural bodybuilder in general strength is what you're probably after, huh?
Yeah, and like I would say like for me, I think just like the way my brain works, the logbook is like a little dopamine hit, and I try to like fill myself and make sure like I never like I'm not like I don't have like an ego attachment to strength. So like if my eccentrics are always super slow, I'm stretching, I'm like trying to keep my form super standardized. And then I'm just using the logbook as like, oh, I'm just hitting that. Cause sometimes like, yeah, it's interesting. You've got me thinking because I'm like, okay, well, I don't take measurements. Like I've taken measurements like 2 times in my entire life. Like I don't take
Mhm.
measurements. I don't do any of that. So now I'm like, oh, you got me thinking. I'm like, oh shit, maybe I should take measurements to actually make sure I'm fucking growing. Cause like the pictures only do so much. It's like, yeah, my
Yeah.
arm, it's kind of hard to tell. Cause then, especially if you're like bulking and then you start getting kind of like,
Then you
um,
look smaller in pictures and stuff, and then
yeah, and you don't know, right? Like it's hard to tell. And I'm
you
like, oh,
can't tell
maybe
an eighth of an inch on your arm in a picture. That's all I'd say.
that's what I'm saying. I'm like, so you got me thinking. And sometimes like it's like rather than focus on the physique, I'm just focusing on the logbook. But maybe that's a bad way to go about it if you're
Well,
overall.
no, I think you're onto something because the logbook for you, you have the discipline to train properly. I can tell by one, I see you train on your Instagram, and two, you're aware of that. You take your slow eccentrics and whatnot. You're training for hypertrophy, so, and you're aware of that. So that's not an issue. You just need some type of reward at the end of your training, like we all do.
Yeah.
So for you, that's looking at the logbook, and you're not tied to the maximum strength output you can put into the workout. You are attached to, or you want your reward to be being better than what you did before. And I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
good because you have the discipline to do that. I think monthly measurements or just posing in the mirror after a workout, I think that's going to be pretty important for bodybuilders too. And save yourself an extra 2 or 3 minutes to do that after a leg day or whenever you hit your squats. Check out your quads after,
Check out
like
the pump.
yeah, peep the pump. Stuff like that's going to be important, and I think that's a good way to reward yourself too. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, if you have the discipline to take your logbook seriously and still train the right way and be disciplined about it, yeah, that's a good way to do it too. I'm definitely not against that. And like I said, I mean, I log my stretched wrist curls, drop set to finger curls. Like I
Yeah.
love logging stuff. It's important.
That's cool, man. No, I think what's important about the stuff that you're doing is um I think there's like many ways up the mountain. There's obviously people that have like power, whatever that means, power built their way to like a great physique. But I think like there's many ways to do it. And even just like how you track your progress, there's people that never track their calories and cut or get shredded, or people that never track their calories and bulk perfectly. And then there's people that need to do track their calories. And like you see, there's like many ways to skin a cat, I guess you could say. But at the end of the day, it's more about um I guess the word optimal is kind of like a meme at this point, but like what's optimal for your goals.
Yeah,
But even just your psychology though, like too, like for me, it's like the logbook is great for me, but obviously what you're doing is working for you.
yeah.
Like no, I can't be like, oh, dude, no, you got to use the logbook. You got to do this and focus on strength. Because at the end of the day, like if someone's like fucking winning at what they're doing and they look the way they want to look, it's like hard to fucking argue with them.
It is hard to argue with that, and I think part of what it is the path is important because while some people can train suboptimally in a I hate saying that word because I think it's a meme too, but if some people can train suboptimally, I think all you run the risk of losing sight of your goals because you're chasing a different goal in pursuit of a different result, and I think that
Mm.
can take a lot of people off track. Even someone like myself, who's very self-aware and confident and whatnot, I do think that can be an issue, and I think the the journeys at the end of the day, that's what it is. Like, would you rather? What's the is it Banff? That's the national park or the lake or whatever out in your area. Would you
Yeah.
rather drive a highway to Alaska to get to Alaska, or would you rather drive through Banff and hike through it to get to Alaska? You know what I mean? You end up
Yeah.
at Alaska the same way, but are you gonna be happier in the first route or the second one?
Yeah, that's a fair point, man. Like you got to be happy with what you're doing day to day in the gym.
Yeah, chase your goal and pick the road that takes you there. Yeah, there's many ways to skin a cat, but I think you'll have more fun and you'll stay on track more the one that's designed to take you right to that goal. And hypertrophy training's fun. It's cool. Yeah, is it as instantly rewarding or gratifying the first time you try it? Probably not, but that's where I think there's value in mind muscle connection. I think there's value in the pump as long as it's not taking away from the more important variables. I think that stuff's going to be key because that's kind of like what you said, that little dopamine reward from beating the logbooks. I think that's kind of the same thing when you look at hypertrophy training, so long as you have the discipline and self awareness to actually train hard and fulfill every training session.
Fuck yeah. That's a good place to wrap this up. I like that little end rant right there. Good shit, man. Good shit.
Appreciate it,
No,
bro.
that was cool. I think I got like a better idea of your philosophy, which is cool.
Yeah, I'm glad we touched on training at the end. I wasn't even planning on necessarily talking about training a whole ton. But yeah, I think that was yeah,
Yeah,
summed it up well.
we had an hour of just random personal talk and then half hour of
Yeah,
training.
hour of bros in their 20s chatting. Training.
Cool, man. Cool. Well, if you just want to let everybody know where they can find you, that'd be great.
Yeah, YouTube's Basement Bodybuilding. Instagram is the same thing. I think it's basement.bodybuilding. You'll see a once a month post there. YouTube's where it's at, so follow me there.
Cool, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on.
Oh yeah, appreciate you having me, man. It was dope.